The sound came first, metal twisting, glass shattering, a violent screech of tires clawing polished hospital floors. Then the screams, sharp, panicked, cutting through the hum of monitors and the antiseptic hush of the emergency room. The black sedan crashed through the sliding doors, spinning sideways before skidding to a stop in the lobby. Glass glittered across the floor, smoke curling from the crumpled hood. Beneath the front panel, a man lay pinned, legs twisted, blood spreading fast across the tile. Chaos detonated. Doctors scattered for cover. Nurses yelled into phones, and voices tangling in codes and numbers. Alarms shrieked. The lobby pulsed with noise, panic, and orders barked over orders. Someone shouted for a trauma surgeon. Another yelled to clear civilians. But the nearest surgeon was floors away. The man under the car twitched once. Then he went still. And in the corner, by the supply closet, mop bucket half full of gray water, Frank froze. Navy scrubs, rubber gloves, mop in hand. He'd been invisible here for 3 years, a fixture like the linoleum underfoot. No one looked at him now either, but Frank's eyes locked on the victim, and something stirred. Not ancient, not vague, something remembered. He knew that sound, that silence after the twitch, the way blood spread when the pulse collapsed. He'd seen it before, long ago, in a place no one here would believe he'd ever been. His chest tightened. Step forward and everything changes. Stay still and the man dies. The 60 seconds were already slipping away. Have you ever realized the quiet person around you was carrying a story you've never imagined? Share your thoughts below and make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories. Frank had a way of disappearing without ever leaving. Not like a ghost, more like a furniture. He moved through Mercy General Hospital the way shadows live through light. Always present, rarely seen, necessary but never acknowledged. At 5:30 sharp, he clocked in through the service entrance. At 2 in the morning, he clocked out the same way. In between, he mopped, emptied bins, and wiped railings. He was the quiet hum behind the chaos. The one who kept the floor clean enough for the rest of the world to pretend he wasn't there. The staff had their jokes. Careful, don't trip over the mop, old man, Dr. Brannan would say, flashing his residents a grin. They laughed, not at Frank exactly, but through him. He never answered, never explained. He just shifted his bucket aside, nodding politely, like a piece of furniture that had learned manners. In the cafeteria, he ate alone, corner table, back to the wall, listening to other people's lives. Doctors bragged about impossible saves, nurses vented about impossible patients, and administrators who cursed at endless paperwork. Frank chewed slowly, eyes down, saying nothing. He'd become an expert at nothing. But sometimes, invisibility cracked. Like the night in pediatrics where a stuffed bear rolled under a bed and a mother, too exhausted to move, let it go. Frank dropped to his knees, reached into the shadows, and set the bear back in the girl's arms. Her smile, small, radiant, heartbreaking, glipped through the haze of fluorescent light. Frank returned it with the faintest curve of his lips, then vanished again into the routine. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his hands drifted to his pocket. A pair of dog tags rested there, dented, scratched. The letters worn down from years of finger tracing them like scripture. He would turn them over once, twice, as if searching for something written between the lines. Then, he tucked them away before anyone noticed. The tags clinked softly when he walked. No one else ever heard it, but to Frank, it was deafening. The sound of a rhythm he'd once lived by, the echo of orders he couldn't forget. There was a stillness about him, like a man who'd seen too much and decided silence was safer than memory. Nobody asked who he really was. Nobody cared. But that night they would. The crash happened at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Frank was in the East Wing, third pass of the night. The ER was alive with its usual after-dark rhythm. Overdoses, chest pains, broken bones. He'd learned to tune it out, dip them up, ring it out, push forward, pull back. The repetition calmed him, kept him safe. Then came the sound, a shriek of tires too sharp for polished tiles. A split second later, the glass exploded. The sliding doors didn't open, they shattered, flung inward like a shrapnel. A black sedan burst through the entrance like a missile, metal screaming, hood folding in on itself as it plowed into the reception desk. Chaos erupted. Shards caught in the fluorescent light like glitter. A nurse cried out, clutching her bleeding arm. A computer monitor spun across the air before slamming down. Papers scattered, fluttering like startled birds. The fire alarm triggered, then sprinkles. Cold water poured down in sheets, turning the lobby into a storm. And underneath the crumpled front end, twisted and trapped, was the driver. Mid-30s, jeans, a flannel shirt already soaked dark with blood. His legs was crushed at the femur. Frank saw the rhythm of the spray. Arterial, fast, too fast. A severed femoral artery gives you maybe 2 minutes before shock, 4 before death. Dr. Brennan came running, white coat flaring behind him, barking orders that vanished into the chaos. Trauma team, vascular, get this car off him. 2 orderlies threw themselves at the sedan, straining until veins bulged in their necks. Useless. It was wedged too tightly. A young nurse pressed gauze against the wound. Her hands shook, blood soaking through in seconds. He's losing too much blood, she shouted. We need to clamp the artery. Wait for the surgeon, Brannon snapped, but his voice carried a hint of hesitation. Even he saw the truth. The man didn't have minutes to spare. Look at him, the older nurse barked, steady even in panic. He's crashing, he won't make it. Monitors beeped frantically, then slower, weaker, each note further apart. Onlookers pressed forward. Security shoved them back. A paramedic dug into his kit with frantic hands, but the hopelessness in his eyes betrayed him. Frank stood on the edge of it all, mop still in his grip. Water ran down his face from the sprinklers, but something burned behind his eyes. The ER blurred, and suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. The air smelled of dust and diesel, not antiseptic. The water on his skin turned to desert heat, sun hammering down. He heard another crash, different but the same. A Humvee flipped on its side, flames curling from the wreckage. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning rubber. And beneath it, voices, young voices screaming for a medic. Callahan, Mercer, Winslow, Caldwell. Names he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Names etched into him like scars. Frank's breath hitched. He felt the weight of a rifle against his back, the dry bite of sand in his teeth. Blood poured into the desert, so much that the dust clumped into mud. Hands twitched, grasp, went still. He blinked, and the desert flickered into the ear again. Shining tile, red rivers pooling. The nurses gasped useless against the torrent. Blink, desert, blink, hospital. The world collapsed together. Blood and sand, blood on tile, screams here, screams there. It was all the same. The mop slipped from his hands, clattering on the tile. Nobody noticed. His chest locked tight. His hands shook uncontrollably. Vision tunneled, edges darkening, the world closing in. He knew what was happening. Panic attack, but knowing didn't stop it. His breath came shallow, ragged. He wanted to run. He wanted to rip off his scrubs, clock out, walk to his truck and never come back. That's why he'd chosen this life. That's why he mopped floors and kept his head down. To never stand in this place again. To never feel the heat of blood, the weight of another's life in his hands. To never hear those voices in his head whispering, not again. Frank, a voice pierced through. A nurse, Maria, young, her eyes wide. Frank, are you okay? You're pale. He couldn't answer. His gaze was locked in the spreading red tide beneath the sedan. Blood that wouldn't stop. The victim gasped weakly, chest rattling. His eyes rolled back. The monitor stretched into one long unbroken tone. Time froze. And in that sound, Frank was 20 years younger, kneeling in the sand, pressing down on wounds too deep to close, whispering words that had haunted him ever since. Not again, never again. The desert roared in his ears. The ER burned into his eyes. Something inside him tore open. Or maybe it fused shut. He couldn't tell which, but his hands stopped shaking. His breath steadied. His vision cleared. And for the first time in years, he didn't run. He moved. Frank's hands went to his belt before his brain caught up. Muscle memory. 20 years dormant but still there, coiled and waiting like a snake. The letter whipped free with a crack of the buckle against tile. He dropped to his knees beside the wreckage, glass slicing through his scrubs, biting into his shins. He didn't feel it, didn't care. The man under the sedan was fading fast. Frank looped the belt high on the thigh, above the pulsing wound, and yanked hard, too hard. The leg spasmed. The leather bit into flesh. He adjusted, pulled again. The gush of blood slowed, from a fountain to a sluggish trickle. A voice cut through the noise. "What the hell are you doing?" Dr. Brennan, eyes blazing, white coat soaked through the sprinklers. "Tourniquet," Frank said, not looking up. His fingers tested the tension, adjusting until it felt right. The femoral artery severed. He's got maybe 90 seconds before hypovolemic shock kills him. His voice startled him, calm, clipped, clinical. The voice of combat medic Frank Castellano, not Janitor Frank. Brandon froze, incredulous. How do you... Time for questions later. Frank's gaze locked onto the young nurse beside him, hands trembling on sudden gauze. What's your name?" Erin. Erin, listen. Move your pressure here." He repositioned her hand just below the belt, firm and steady. "Don't let go. You'll handle cramp, go numb, push through it, understand?" She nodded, shaky but focused. "Stop!" Brandon barked suddenly. He lunged forward, trying to shove Frank's hand aside. "You're not trained for this. You're a janitor." Frank snapped his head up, eyes like steel. "If you touch me, he dies." The tone was so sharp, so certain. Brennan actually stopped. For a beat, the entire ER seemed to hold its breath. The monitor screamed flatline. Someone shouted, "He's coding!" Frank was already moving. He slid higher, locked his palms over the man's sternum, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rhythm consumed him. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Nothing else mattered. The ER erupted again, but this time in confusion. Nurses looked at Brennan, unsure if they should intervene. Security shifted uneasily, half stepping forward, then stopping. Erin pressed gauze with white-knuckled determination, and Brennan, hands clenched, stood frozen, watching the janitor work with a precision no cleaner should have. "Who is he?" someone whispered. Frank blocked them all out. 30 compressions, tilt head, 2 breaths, chest rise, good, back to compressions. But with each push, ghosts pressed into. Callahan, 19, chest full of shrapnel, gasping in desert heat while mortars fell. Frank had done compressions then too, whispering promises he wasn't sure he believed. "Not you, not this time." 8 minutes, arms on fire, refusing to quit. Callahan had lived, but others? He blinked hard. Sweat and sprinkler water blurred his eyes. His arms trembled, not from fear this time, but from exertion. "Stop!" Brandon shouted again, voice cracking. "You'll break his ribs. Better broken ribs than a coffin." Frank growled through clenched teeth. He didn't slow, couldn't. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The man's chest stuttered, convulsed. Nothing. Doubt surged. What if this time I fail? What if it's Mercer all over again? Eyes going glassy, pulse slipping through my fingers. Frank's hand faltered for half a second, just half. "Don't stop," Aaron's voice, shrill with panic. "Please." Frank gritted his teeth. Focus. Not then. Now. Not Mercer. This man. Move. He drove his weight down harder, finding the rhythm again. A single blip on the monitor, so faint it might have been static. Another, then another. Staggered, irregular, but a rhythm nonetheless. The man beneath him convulsed, coughed, a wet, rattling gasp, and dragged air into his lungs. His chest rose, fell, again, alive. For a heartbeat, the ER was silent. No shouts, no orders, no alarms, just the weak and even beeping of a heart clawing its way back from the edge. Frank sat back, arms trembling violently, his chest heaving. Blood smeared his hands, filling the creases of his palms, slick under his nails. He stared at them, at the proof of what he'd just done, and for a moment, he wasn't in the ER. He was in the desert, 25, hands coated in another boy's blood, wondering how many more he could lose before it broke him. But this one had come back. The spell broke when Brennan finally spoke, voice low, shaky. "That's impossible." He looked at Frank like he was seeing him for the first time. "You're not just..." A nurse whispered. "He was military. Look at the way he..." Security glanced between themselves, the weight of the reveal settling. Frank pushed himself to his feet, legs unsteady, bloodied hands hanging at his side. The eyes of the room burned into him. Fear, awe, confusion. He met none of them. His gaze stayed fixed on the men's gasping under the wreckage. Around him, chaos resumed. Doctors rushing forward, nurses shouting vitals. orderlies scrambling for equipment. But the center of gravity had shifted. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. The janitor was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely. Frank Castellano, combat medic, a man who swore he'd left that life buried in sand and blood. And tonight, whether he wanted it or not, it had come roaring back. The hospital cafeteria smelled of burnt coffee and bleach. Fluorescents buzzed overhead. Vending machines hummed behind him. Frank sat in his usual corner, a half-eaten sandwich before him, hands raw from disinfectant curled around a paper cup. He listened to the chatter, nurses trading stories, doctors dissecting cases, administrators complaining about paperwork, the sound that flowed around him like he wasn't there. Today felt different. Eyes followed him. Whispers trailed his name. Ever since the night a car tore through the ear doors and he saved a man's life, people had been looking at him differently. The janitor they used to overlook now carried something no title could grant: respect. And Frank, who had spent years trying to stay invisible, didn't quite know what to do with it. A voice snapped him out of his thought. Frank! Dr. Brennan stood a few feet away, lab coat pristine, expression unreadable. Behind him hovered a cluster of residents, their usual smirks gone. Brennan's eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto Frank like he was seeing him for the first time. Can we talk? Frank's jaw tightened. He rose slowly, nodding once. The cafeteria quieted as the two men walked out together, whispers chasing them down to the corridor until they stopped outside an empty supply closet. Brennan crossed his arms, posture rigid. You went into that ward last night, Brennan said. Not a question. Frank's jaw worked, but he stayed silent. You carried that boy out when no one else could find him. Brandon's tone wasn't admiring, it was accusatory, like Frank had violated an unspoken rule. What are you? A janitor? Charging into burning corridor? Charging into a burning corridor. Do you realize how reckless that was? Frank looked past him, eyes tracing the sterile tiles on the wall. His throat felt thick. I just did what needed to be done, he murmured. Brennan scoffed, a harsh sound. That's not an answer. I've seen men freeze in combat zones less chaotic than last night. You didn't freeze. You knew exactly where to go, how to move. That wasn't luck. That was instinct. That was training. The word hung heavy in the air. Training. Frank's fingers twitched towards his pocket where the old dog tags rested, cool metal pressing against his thigh. He said nothing. Who are you, Frank? Brandon demanded, voice low, cutting, because I'm starting to think you're not just the guy who cleans up after us. For a moment, Frank almost told him. About the desert heat that clung to his skin even now, the shrapnel scars hidden under scrubs, the names etched in memory like gravestones he carried in his chest. About the orders followed. The blood scrubbed off hands that had once carried rifles instead of mops, but the words stuck in his throat. To speak them was to relieve them, and he'd spent years burying them deep, under bleach and silence. I'm nobody, Frank said finally, voice steady but soft. I clean floors, that's all. Brennan's eyes narrowed, frustration flashing across his face. For a heartbeat, he looked ready to press harder, to force the truth out. But then, something shifted. He exhaled, shoulders loosening just slightly. You saved that boy's life, Brandon said, quieter now. I don't know who you were before this place, but You're not invisible anymore. Frank flinched at that word, invisible. It had been his shield, his armor. To lose it felt like being stripped bare. I didn't do it for things, he muttered. Maybe not, Brandon admitted. He extended a hand, almost reluctantly. But it doesn't change the fact that you did it, and I respect that. Frank stared at the hand for a long moment before shaking it, his grip firm but brief. Brandon walked away, leaving Frank alone in the corridor, heart pounding. That night, as the hospital quieted, Frank pushed his mop down the long fluorescent hole. The wheel squeaked, the bucket sloshed. Routine, safe, but every step carried weight. He could feel the eyes of the staff lingering when he passed. Nurses nodded now, not dismissively, but with something like gratitude. One even whispered thank you as he walked by. Frank kept his head down, cheeks hot. He wasn't built for this spotlight. He stopped at the end of the hall, leaning on the mop handle. The dog tags slid out of his pocket. He rubbed them between his fingers. The edges familiar, worn. The metal clinked softly, echoing against the tiles. Once they had defined him. Soldier, protector, killer. Now, he was just a janitor who couldn't stay invisible anymore. He slipped the tags back into his pocket, tightening his grip on the mop, and pushed forward. The act felt stubborn, defiant, a way of saying, I'm still just this. Don't make me more than I am. The following afternoon, as Frank wheeled his cart past the waiting room, a woman and her two children stood. The little boy clutched a bandaged arm, his face pale but alive. His mother's eyes were red from crying, but when she saw Frank, they softened. She approached slowly, her daughter tugging on her sleeve. You're the one, the mother said, voice thick, the one who carried my son out. Frank shook his head. I just helped. But the girl stepped forward, clutching a worn stuffed bear. You're like a superhero, she whispered. Frank froze. The words hit harder than any bullet ever had. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He managed a small nod, then turned away, gripping the cart handle until his knuckles widened. That night, Catherine, one of the veteran nurses, found him in the cafeteria again. She slid into the seat across from him, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. Don't look so scared, she said with a tired smile. I'm not here to interrogate you. Frank's eyes dropped to the coffee, steam curled upward. You did something extraordinary, she continued, and you're trying to pretend it didn't happen. But people see you now, Frank, whether you like it or not. I'm not a hero, he whispered. Maybe not, Catherine said. She leaned forward, her gaze kind but firm. But you don't have to stay a ghost either. Frank swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he let himself meet someone's eyes fully. In them, he saw no mockery, no dismissal, only recognition. The weight of the dog tags pressed against his leg, heavier than ever. He didn't answer her. Instead, he took the cup of coffee, lifted it to his lips, and drank. The warmth spread through him, unsettling and comforting at once. Outside, the storm had cleared. The world was quieter now, but something in Frank had shifted. He wasn't ready to step into the light, but maybe, just maybe, he'd stop running from it. 3 weeks passed like water. Frank kept his routine, clocking in at 5:30, pushing the mop, emptying the trash bins, but the rhythm didn't suit him the way it once had. Everything felt tilted. The cloak of invisibility he'd worn so comfortably was gone, shredded by one night he hadn't asked for but couldn't undo. Now, the staff saw him. They nodded in the halls. They said his name. Some even stopped to thank him. It was easier in a way when they hadn't looked at him at all. Respect was heavier than dismissal. One morning, a young resident caught him between shifts. Mr. Castellano? His voice cracked with nerves. Dr. Brennan said you're the best at tourniquet placement. Would you show me? Frank blinked. A student doctor, asking him to teach? His throat tightened. He could still hear Brennan saying, textbook application. You saved that man's life. Words that didn't belong to a janitor. Still, he found himself in an empty conference room, looping about loosely around the kid's arm, showing pressure points. Explaining the difference between venous and arterial flow. Romance scribbled notes like the knowledge might save his own life someday. Maybe it would save someone else's. Word spread. Residents, then nurses, and even a few attendings came. Frank showed them tricks he'd sworn he'd buried. How to improvise. How to think under fire when the clog is already bleeding. Each time, he told himself it would be the last. Each time, another face showed up, asking, when the administration called him in. He nearly walked out. Consulting. Disaster preparedness, they said. We'll pay for recertification. You belong on the team. He'd shaken his head. I'm not that man anymore. But the truth was, he hadn't stopped thinking about it since. Teaching hadn't broken him like he feared. It had quieted something. The nightmares were still there, but softer, less sharp, as though the ghost he carried finally saw proof that he wasn't useless. That maybe their debts had a weight because he'd chosen not to waste what he knew. He wasn't ready to admit that aloud. Not yet. On a Thursday morning, Frank came in early under the excuse of picking up his paycheck. The truth was simpler. He needed to see the man he'd pulled back from the edge. Needed proof. The lobby buzzed with families, stretchers, and clipboards. For a moment, Frank feared he'd missed him. That Travis had slipped out unseen. Then he spotted him. Thin, pale, leaning on a cane but walking, alive. Travis's kid started ahead, balloons bobbing, while his wife steadied his arm. He scanned the lobby, eyes catching Frank's across the room. Something passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, a weight too big for words. Travis broke away, limping, determined. Each step looked like pain, but he pushed through until he stood in front of Frank. I was hoping I'd see you, he said, voice rough but steady. My daughter's been asking if you're a superhero. I told her you are. Don't argue. Frank tried. I'm just a guy with a mop? Travis's smile was weary but warm. Maybe, but you're also the reason my wife isn't a widow. The reason those kids still have a father. He extended a scarred hand. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. Frank shook his hand, feeling the pulse beneath the skin, proof of life. Before leaving, Travis pulled a folded paper from his jacket. Megan made this, said you'd keep it safe. Frank opened it slowly. A crayon drawing, a stick figure in blue holding a mop in one hand and a giant red heart in the other. Above it, crooked letters read, thank you for saving my daddy. Love, Megan. The page trembled in his hands. For years, he'd seen blood on his palms, names etched into dog tags he carried like pennants. Now, he saw a child's heart scrawled in red wax, trust pressed into paper. She worked on it for hours, Travis said. Frank's voice cracked. Tell her I'll keep it forever. Megan broke away long enough to tug Frank's sleeve. Are you really a superhero? He knelt, blinking against the sting in his eyes. No, sweetheart, just a guy who didn't walk away. My dad is alive because of you, she said simply. That makes you a superhero. Frank swallowed hard, unable to answer. She hugged him quickly and fiercely before skipping back to her brother. Alone again, Frank slipped the drawing into his pocket, directly over his heart. In the other pocket, the dog tags rested heavy, names etched in steel, death on one side, life on the other. Later, as sunlight spilled into the lobby, Frank pulled the tags out. For the first time, he whispered something new. I'm okay now, you can rest. And maybe it was imagination, but the weight eased. He tucked both tokens away, picked up his mop, and walked toward the staff entrance. The work would continue, mopping floors, sweeping glass, but maybe soon also teaching again. Maybe saying yes, because sometimes the only way to silence ghosts is to keep saving the living. And maybe, finally, Frank was ready. Everyday heroes are all around us.